I am Audrey, 33 years old, and my father handed my golden child brother a $4 million Manhattan penthouse while tossing me the deed to a toxic wasteland. When I spent 3 grueling years transforming that polluted dirt into an elite, highly profitable eco-resort, my mother showed up uninvited at my office. She looked me dead in the eye and told me I had exactly 36 hours to hand the entire estate over to my brother, or she would make sure I lost everything. I simply smiled and nodded, because the trap I had meticulously set for them was already springing shut. Before I tell you how I brought my entitled family to their knees, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to build your own empire from scratch, while your own flesh and blood prayed for your downfall. Trust me, you will want to hear exactly how I served them their karma. I stood quietly behind my custom oak desk, my eyes locked on the digital countdown clock glowing faintly on the corner of the polished wood. My mother Diana paced furiously across the reclaimed hardwood floors of my executive office. Her designer heels clicked aggressively, echoing through the vast open space of the resort I had built with my bare hands and sheer willpower. She did not bother asking how I was doing. She did not offer a single word of praise for the breathtaking panoramic view of the Hudson Valley, visible through my floor-to-ceiling windows. She simply crossed her arms, adjusted her ridiculously expensive silk scarf, and delivered her delusion. I do not care how much sweat or money you poured into this glorified garbage dump, Audrey. She snapped, her voice dripping with the familiar condescension I had endured my entire life. This property belongs to the Wilson family legacy. You have exactly 36 hours to sign the transfer deeds over to your brother Tyler. He is going to take over as chief executive officer, and you are going to step down quietly. I kept my face perfectly neutral. Years of working as a turnaround consultant and managing venture capital funds had taught me how to completely mask my emotions during high-stakes negotiations. I leaned back in my leather chair and folded my hands. Are you genuinely standing in my office demanding the deed to my property, Mom? I asked, my voice calm and measured. Let us rewind the clock to 3 years ago when Dad passed away. I remember the reading of the will perfectly. I remember the smug look on Tyler's face when the lawyer announced that the undisputed golden child of the Wilson family was getting a $4 million penthouse on the Upper East Side. Tyler, a man who could not balance a simple accounting ledger if his life depended on it, was given the crown jewel of Dad's real estate portfolio. And what did Dad leave me? I continued, not breaking eye contact with her. The daughter who actually possessed a background in finance. The daughter who spent her entire 20s restructuring failing businesses and securing venture capital. He left me the ruins, a bankrupt, abandoned farm with poisoned groundwater, collapsing barns, and a mountain of environmental code violations. I remember how the two of you laughed at me. I remember Tyler actually popping a bottle of vintage champagne right there in the lawyer's office, joking loudly that I could use the toxic wasteland to open a tetanus clinic. You told me I should be grateful I received anything at all. Diana slammed her hand down on my desk, her face flushing red with a mix of indignation and panic. That was your father's choice, Audrey, she countered defensively. He knew Tyler needed a prestigious headquarters for his private real estate fund. Tyler is a man. He needed that Manhattan address to secure meetings with high-net-worth individuals. But things have completely changed. I tilted my head, feigning ignorance. Have they? Diana let out a sharp, frustrated breath. Yes, they have. Tyler lost the Manhattan apartment. The creditors took it last month. He made some aggressive investments that did not pan out, and now he is facing severe liquidity issues. His wife is threatening to leave him and take the kids if he does not bounce back immediately to his former status. He needs to step in as the head of this resort right now. He needs to show his New York investors that he is managing a successful high-end property. It is the absolutely only way he can save his reputation and his marriage. I watched her closely, marveling at the sheer audacity of her logic. You want me to hand over a multi-million-dollar fully operational eco-resort that I built from a toxic wasteland, just so Tyler can pretend he built it? just so he can use my success as a prop to impress his investors and keep his wife from divorcing him. You are his sister, Diana pleaded, though it sounded more like a threat. You owe this family your loyalty. You have always been the tough one, the one who does not need the spotlight. Tyler is fragile right now. If he does not get a win, he will be ruined. You are going to step aside, let him take the credit and save your brother. This was the core of my mother's entire philosophy. My accomplishments were communal property ready to be harvested whenever her golden boy stumbled. My mental health, my exhaustion, my financial risks during those 3 brutal years of environmental cleanup meant absolutely nothing to her. She viewed me not as a daughter, but as a convenient safety net for Tyler's endless failures. She genuinely expected me to bow my head hand over the keys to a $50 million enterprise and fade into the background. You can stay on as his administrative assistant, Diana added. He will even pay you a modest salary out of the resort's profits. The sheer disrespect of offering me an administrative role in my own company was staggering. I slowly stood up from my desk, resting my fingertips on the cool wood. I looked at the digital clock again. My mother really believed that invoking family loyalty would make me surrender the empire I had bled for. She had absolutely no idea who she was dealing with. Your 36 hours start now, Mom, I said smoothly. We will see who owns what when the clock runs out. The roar of an oversized engine shattered the tranquility of the mountain air before I even finished my sentence. I turned toward the expansive glass wall to see a pristine matte black Ford F-150 Raptor skid aggressively into the circular driveway. It was the ultimate symbol of debt-funded American luxury, completely spotless without a single scratch of actual labor on its reinforced steel frame. Tyler had arrived. He threw the heavy door open, stepping onto the cobblestone with the unearned swagger of a king inspecting his newly conquered territory. I left my office and walked out to the main lobby to meet him. The space was a masterpiece of sustainable architecture, featuring soaring 50-foot ceilings crafted from reclaimed timber, a living green wall that purified the air, and massive windows overlooking a private lake. It took me 3 years of fighting city zoning boards, securing environmental permits, and bleeding my savings dry to make this lobby a reality. Tyler strolled through the automatic sliding doors, his designer sunglasses perched on his head, tossing his keys to a passing bellhop who was not even a valet. He did not look at the breathtaking structural beams or the intricate stonework. Instead, he ran a hand along the custom reception desk and gave a highly dismissive smirk. "It is cute, Audrey," he announced, his voice booming unpleasantly across the serene space. "A bit rustic for my taste, maybe a little too much wood, but we can bring in some modern fixtures once I take over. Not bad for a girl playing contractor, though." I stood a few feet away watching my older brother appraise my empire as if it were a high school science fair project. He wore a tailored suit that had definitely not been paid for, carrying an air of total and absolute delusion. 3 years ago, this land was a toxic crater. I personally negotiated with the local indigenous tribes, remediated the poisoned soil, and secured the highly exclusive eco-tourism certifications that made this property a gold mine. Tyler, on the other hand, had spent those same 3 years running a Manhattan real estate fund into the ground and hiding from angry creditors. Yet he looked around my lobby with absolute ownership, running his fingers over the custom upholstery of the lounge chairs before turning his attention back to me. He let out a loud, deeply patronizing chuckle. "Mom already prepped you on the timeline, right?" Tyler asked, striding up to me and clapping his hands together like a coach addressing a subordinate player. "I need you out of the master suite by tomorrow morning. I am moving my things in. I need the vendor contracts, operating licenses, and financial forecasts on my desk by tonight. I have a major international venture capitalist flying in from London next week, and I need to show him that Wilson Estates is fully operational under my exclusive command." I crossed my arms, maintaining a perfectly level gaze. "Your command. You have absolutely no legal or financial claim to this property, Tyler. I bought this land. I secured the financing. I hold the sole deed." Tyler rolled his eyes, heavily sighing, as if dealing with a stubborn toddler. "Look, Audrey, let us not make this an ugly legal battle. We know you only pulled this off because Dad left you the land to keep you busy. But this is the big leagues now. We are talking about courting global investors and managing tens of millions in revenue. You do not have the constitution for that kind of pressure. You are going to step down, take the administrative assistant role, and let a real executive handle the heavy lifting. I stared at him, letting the sheer absurdity of his demands hang in the quiet air of the lobby. A real executive, I asked softly. You mean an executive who lost his Manhattan penthouse because he ran a fraudulent real estate fund into the dirt? An executive whose wife is currently consulting divorce lawyers because he squandered their entire savings. Tyler's face darkened, the confident facade cracking to reveal the fragile ego beneath. Do not ever speak to me about my business or my marriage, he snapped, pointing a manicured finger at my face. You know nothing about high-level finance. You had a nervous breakdown 5 years ago. You spent 6 months crying in your apartment because you could not handle corporate stress. Do you think international investors will trust their money with a woman who has a history of severe clinical depression? You are completely unstable. He stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me, a classic bullying tactic he had relied on since we were children. I am doing you a massive favor by letting you stay on as an assistant. He continued, his tone turning dangerously low. I am taking the target off your back. If you try to run this place, you will crack under the pressure, embarrass our family, and end up heavily medicated and completely useless. Step aside, Audrey. You are simply not fit to lead. Let the men handle the business. My mother, who had followed me out from the office, stepped up beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Tyler is right, Audrey, she chimed in, perfectly completing their toxic performance. You have always been far too fragile. This is for your own good. We are protecting you from another mental collapse. Just hand over the operation and we will make sure you are taken care of. I looked back and forth between my brother and my mother. They genuinely believed their own lies. They had weaponized a period of grief from my past, twisting it to justify stealing my present success. They thought my silence meant total submission. They thought my calmness meant I was breaking. They did not realize my silence was simply the sound of me letting them talk their way straight into the trap I had already set. Diana moved closer, her perfectly manicured hands reaching out in a gesture of maternal comfort that I knew all too well. It was the same gesture she used when she forced me to give up my high school graduation trip so Tyler could attend a luxury sports camp. Her voice dropped an octave, dripping with manufactured sorrow. She positioned herself right between Tyler and me, playing the ultimate peacemaker while quietly tightening the noose. Audrey, sweetheart, please look at the bigger picture here, she cooed, her eyes wide with fake sympathy. Your brother is in unimaginable pain. Eliza is threatening to take the children to Connecticut permanently. She has already hired a vicious divorce attorney who is circling Tyler like a vulture. Do you really want your nieces and nephews to grow up in a broken home? Do you want them to think their aunt was the reason their father lost his visitation rights? Because that is exactly what will happen if he cannot prove he has a stable, high-income executive position by the end of the month. The judge will completely strip him of his custody. She stepped even closer, her perfume suffocating the fresh cedar scent of my lobby. You have no children of your own, Audrey. You do not understand the terrifying stakes of keeping a family together. Tyler is bleeding. He is drowning in stress, and you are standing on the shore hoarding the life raft. Is your ego really more important than the survival of your own blood? We are not asking you to leave the property forever. We are simply asking you to step back, be the supportive sister you were raised to be, and let him take the helm until the storm passes. Tyler crossed his arms, nodding in solemn agreement, perfectly playing the part of the wounded patriarch. I just need a win, Audrey. Just a few quarters of solid returns to show the court and the investors that I am completely viable. I remained entirely motionless. My lack of visible reaction seemed to agitate my mother further. The fake sympathy began to melt away, replaced by the sharp, demanding edge she used when her gaslighting failed to yield immediate submission. You are being incredibly selfish, Diana hissed, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. You are purposely trying to destroy your brother out of some petty, lingering resentment over the inheritance. Your father gave you this land to teach you humility, not to turn you into a greedy, unfeeling corporate monster. You have always been so rigid, so completely devoid of empathy. Your brother is literally begging for his life, and you are staring at him like a stranger. Have I raised a sociopath? Give him the respect he deserves. He is the eldest. He is the man of this family. It is his birthright to lead. When I still did not speak, my mother lost the last remaining shred of her calculated patience. Her eyes darted to the heavy brass master keyring clipped to the belt loop of my tailored trousers. Those keys controlled every secure area in the resort, from the executive suites to the server rooms. With a sudden aggressive lunge, she reached for my hip. "Just give me the keys, Audrey," she demanded, her manicured fingers clawing at the brass ring. "We are doing this right now. You are going to go back to your apartment, pack your things, and take a long, quiet vacation while we fix the mess you are making of this family. Give them to me." Her nails dug into my side as she yanked at the metal ring. The sheer audacity of my mother attempting to physically rob me in the middle of my own property was breathtaking. She gritted her teeth, pulling harder, when the heavy-duty carabiner refused to give way. Tyler stepped forward, looming over me, clearly intending to help her pry the keys from my possession by force if necessary. "Stop fighting us," Audrey, Tyler commanded, his voice rising in anger. "Stop acting like a spoiled child. You are embarrassing yourself. Mom is right. You are completely out of control. Hand over the keys before I have to call security and tell them you are having a mental episode." They genuinely thought they could intimidate me into submission. They thought the threat of public humiliation and false accusations of mental instability would make me crumble. Diana kept pulling at the brass ring, her face contorted with ugly, desperate greed, muttering that I was a terrible daughter who deserved to be left with nothing. I did not panic. I did not raise my voice. I simply placed my hand over my mother's wrist and squeezed right on the pressure point, just hard enough to make her gasp and release her grip. I smoothly unclipped the keyring myself and held it up, letting the brass keys chime together in the quiet lobby. Tyler smiled, reaching out, thinking he had won. I dropped the keys right back into my own pocket. "You both seem to labor under the profound delusion that this is a negotiation," I said, my voice echoing with absolute freezing clarity. "You think screaming, grabbing, and throwing a tantrum will magically rewrite property laws. You think leveraging your ruined marriage and your spectacular financial incompetence gives you the right to seize my empire." I took a slow, deliberate step back, surveying the two people who had made my childhood a living nightmare. They looked so confident, so entirely convinced of their own fabricated authority. I felt my pulse steady. There was no anger left in my chest, only the cold, sharp precision of a surgeon holding a scalpel. I raised my left arm, pulling back the cuff of my blazer to expose my watch. I looked at the dial. It was exactly 10 in the morning. I let my eyes meet my mother's, then shifted my gaze to my brother. "Your 36 hours start now," I stated, my tone devoid of any emotion. "Enjoy your tour of the lobby." I turned on my heel and walked toward the private executive elevators, leaving them standing in stunned silence on the marble floor. I did not even make it to my office before my phone vibrated with a calendar notification. A mandatory shareholder meeting had been forcefully booked into my schedule, set for the VIP dining room on the top floor of the resort. I knew immediately that Diana and Tyler had not come alone. They had brought the cavalry. I bypassed my office, rode the glass elevator to the private dining tier, and pushed open the heavy oak doors. The room was packed. My mother and brother sat at the head of the long mahogany table, looking incredibly smug. Surrounding them were my aunts, uncles, and cousins, the entire extended Wilson clan, sipping my top-shelf sparkling water and snacking on artisanal hors d'oeuvres my kitchen staff had prepared. But my eyes immediately locked onto the man sitting to my brother's right. Malik Jackson, my older sister's husband. Malik was a high-powered Wall Street litigator, a brilliant and ruthless African-American attorney who commanded respect the second he walked into a courtroom. Today he wore a flawless charcoal Tom Ford suit, his posture impeccably straight, a crocodile leather briefcase resting on the table in front of him. Malik was not a cartoon villain. He was a man of logic, power, and calculated risk. Right now, his formidable legal mind was functioning entirely as a hired gun for my mother's delusion. I took a seat at the opposite end of the table, crossing my legs. "You brought a corporate litigator to a family dispute, Mom," I said smoothly. "I must rate highly on your threat index." Malik did not smile. He opened his briefcase with a sharp snap and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. "Audrey," he began, his voice carrying the deep, resonant authority that made him a terror during cross-examinations. "We are not here to debate fairness or emotional history. We are here to discuss leverage and legal reality. Standing strictly from a legal perspective, your father's will contains a highly ambiguous clause regarding the, and I quote, disposition of inherited family legacy land." I maintained a completely flat expression. "That land was legally transferred to my name 3 years ago, Malik. The deed is ironclad. I personally secured the commercial zoning." Malik leaned forward, steepling his fingers. Nothing in estate law is ironclad when a multi-million-dollar asset suddenly materializes from a previously undervalued property. Diana and Tyler are prepared to file a massive lawsuit in the Connecticut probate court by tomorrow morning. They will formally contest the original property transfer, claiming you exerted undue influence over your father during his final days to secure a commercial plot disguised as a worthless farm. I let out a short, humorless laugh. "That is a completely fabricated claim. It will get thrown out of court." "Eventually, yes," Malik agreed, his tone utterly devoid of sympathy. "But you know exactly how the legal system works, Audrey. It is not about winning the lawsuit. It is about the injunction. The moment we file that claim, I will secure a court order freezing all commercial operations, asset transfers, and revenue streams tied to this resort, pending a full judicial review. That review will take at least 24 months. He let that number hang in the air. 24 months. "You took out massive commercial loans to fund the environmental cleanup and the construction of this eco-resort," Malik continued, tapping his expensive pen against the polished wood table. "You leveraged the projected revenue of your first 5 operating quarters to secure that venture capital. If I freeze your operations tomorrow, your doors close. You will generate zero revenue. The bank interest on your construction loans will continue to compound daily. In 6 months, you will default. In 12 months, the bank will foreclose on the entire property. By the time the court dismisses our lawsuit 2 years from now, you will be utterly bankrupt. You will lose the resort to the bank, and your credit will be permanently destroyed." Malik slid the legal filing across the long table. It stopped inches from my hands, so he concluded, his gaze locking onto mine with chilling precision. "You can either sign the property over to Tyler today and walk away with your personal finances intact, or I will tie this estate up in litigation and bleed you dry on bank interest until you have absolutely nothing left." The sheer brutality of the extortion was staggering. My own family was actively threatening to orchestrate my financial ruin just to hand my brother an unearned trophy. I looked around the room, expecting at least one aunt or uncle to express shock at Malik's ruthless strategy. Instead, I saw a terrifying wall of nodding heads. "Malik is right, Audrey," my Aunt Susan chimed in, adjusting her pearl necklace. "You need to be reasonable. Tyler has already posted pictures on his social media checking in at the resort and announcing his new position as the chief executive. The local media is already picking up the story and praising his brilliant new venture. If you make a massive scene and drag this into court, it is going to create a horrific public relations scandal for the entire Wilson family." My Uncle George leaned forward, pointing a finger at me. "Do not forget about the family company stock, Audrey. If the press catches wind of a bitter legal battle over fraud and undue influence, our investors will panic. The stock will plummet. You cannot jeopardize the financial stability of dozens of family members just because you want to hold on to a property that Tyler clearly needs more than you do." I watched my sister Malik's wife quietly sipping her sparkling water, entirely complicit in her husband's tactical strike against me. My cousins muttered in agreement, casting judgmental glares in my direction, treating me as if I were a greedy usurper rather than the rightful owner and creator of the entire enterprise. They had completely swallowed Diana's narrative. In their eyes, Tyler was the rightful heir stepping up to claim his throne, and I was the hysterical, selfish obstacle standing in the way of family harmony. "You see, Audrey?" My mother said, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction as she gestured to the room full of relatives. Everyone agrees. The entire family recognizes that this transition is necessary. You are completely isolated. You have no allies here. Do the right thing and sign the papers, or we will let Malik destroy your financial future. I sat alone at my end of the table, entirely surrounded by the people who shared my blood, watching them justify my execution. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my hard work. I simply absorbed their threats, filing away every single word for the exact moment I would finally spring my trap. Tyler did not even wait for my response to Malik's legal threat. He simply leaned back in his plush leather chair, pulled out his smartphone, and tapped the screen with a sickeningly triumphant grin. He spun the device around and slid it across the table toward me. "You are already too late, Audrey," he stated, his voice brimming with arrogant satisfaction. The market has already spoken clearly. I looked down at the bright screen. It was his new LinkedIn profile. There, displayed for his thousands of professional connections, was a high-resolution photograph of Tyler sitting behind my custom oak desk in my executive office. He had his hands steepled, looking thoughtfully out the window at the valley I had spent 3 years transforming. The caption read, "Thrilled to announce my new venture as Chief Executive Officer of Hudson Valley's premier eco-resort. Transforming raw potential into luxury experiences has always been my passion. Huge things coming for the Wilson family legacy. Grateful for the next chapter." The post had been live for less than an hour, but it was already going viral within the regional business networks. The notification bell flashed relentlessly, a constant stream of incoming validation. I watched as the comments rolled in a parade of ignorant praise from local politicians, real estate developers, and venture capitalists who had no idea they were cheering for a thief. "Incredible vision, Tyler. The Hudson Valley needs your expertise," wrote the president of the local commerce board. "Congratulations on another massive win," commented a prominent Manhattan investor, completely unaware that Tyler had just lost his own penthouse to creditors. "The Wilson family continues to redefine luxury real estate," added an architectural consultant. He swiped over to his Instagram account, showing me the exact same photo, this time heavily filtered and set to an upbeat motivational soundtrack. The comments there were even more infuriating. Sycophantic praise poured in from his country club friends and socialite acquaintances. They praised his resilience, his business acumen, and his flawless execution. Not a single person questioned how a man who had spent the last 3 years running a fraudulent fund in the city had suddenly masterminded a massive ecological turnaround in the mountains. They simply accepted the narrative he presented. He was the successful male heir, the golden boy claiming his rightful throne, and society was entirely ready to applaud his coronation. Tyler pulled the phone back, admiring his own post. "The narrative is set, Audrey," he said softly, making sure only the people closest to him could hear the venom in his voice. "You cannot undo this. The business community has embraced my leadership. If you try to tell the truth now, you will just look like a bitter, jealous sister trying to steal her brother's spotlight. You will look completely unhinged. They are already asking for interviews, Audrey. A major lifestyle magazine wants to feature me next month as a pioneer in sustainable luxury. You are entirely irrelevant to this story right now." As the digital validation fueled Tyler's arrogance, the extended family saw an opportunity to tighten the psychological screws. Aunt Susan leaned across the table, her face pinched in an expression of severe disapproval. "Look at the public response, Audrey," she lectured, gesturing toward Tyler's phone. "The market clearly wants a strong male leader at the helm of this property. Your brother brings a level of prestige and trust that you simply cannot provide. If you throw a tantrum and attempt to drag this into a messy public dispute, you will completely ruin this public relations victory. You will embarrass us all on a regional scale." Uncle George immediately backed her up, slamming his hand lightly on the mahogany surface to emphasize his point. "We are talking about the Wilson legacy, Audrey," he stated sternly. "Your father worked his entire life to build a respected name in the business world. Tyler is finally stepping up to carry that torch forward. He is taking the initiative to expand our family footprint into hospitality and ecotourism. If you go to the press or fight Malik's legal injunction, you will tank the family stock. The investors will see a fractured, chaotic family, and they will pull their funding from every single Wilson enterprise. Do you really want to be the woman who destroys her own family's wealth out of sheer stubbornness?" My mother Diana watched me with a predatory stillness, letting her siblings do the dirty work. She knew exactly how to orchestrate a firing squad. She had spent decades training this family to value public perception above all else, including the truth. The cousins murmured in agreement, casting shameful glances my way. They told me I needed to be a team player. They told me I was acting hysterical over a piece of land that rightfully belonged to the family trust anyway. They demanded I sign the transfer documents immediately to avoid causing a media scandal. They framed my absolute compliance as a moral obligation, insisting that giving up my entire business was the only way to prove my loyalty to the Wilson name. I remained entirely silent. I did not shed a tear. I did not raise my voice to defend the 3 years of agonizing labor I had endured. I did not point out the blatant sexism of their assumptions. I just sat there perfectly still, absorbing every piece of data they provided. I memorized the names of the investors commenting on Tyler's posts. I noted Malik's confident posture. I cataloged the exact degree of complicity from every aunt, uncle, and cousin in the room. They mistook my silence for defeat. They thought they had successfully broken my spirit with their combined social and legal pressure. They had no idea I was simply letting them build their house of cards as high as possible, so the inevitable collapse would leave them with absolutely nothing. Their arrogance was their ultimate vulnerability. I closed my eyes, preparing to execute my calculated move. Tyler did not waste a single second. The moment he believed he had secured my submission, he decided to cement his hostile takeover by seizing the supply chain. He pulled a crumpled printout of my vendor manifest from his jacket pocket, a document he had clearly bribed someone to obtain, and slammed it onto the mahogany table. He put his phone on speaker, ensuring every family member in the room could witness his transition into absolute power. "Get me the head of regional distribution for Hudson Valley Organics." Tyler barked at a receptionist on the other end of the line, his voice echoing loudly across the dining room. "This is Tyler Wilson. I am the new chief executive officer of the resort. Yes, effective immediately. Listen to me carefully. I am restructuring our accounts payable. All future invoices starting with tomorrow morning delivery need to be rerouted from Audrey's accounts directly to Wilson Legacy Holdings, LLC. Do not send another shipment until you update your billing profile." He barely paused to let the confused vendor respond before speaking over them. "I do not care what your standard transition protocol is. You are dealing with Manhattan Capital now. We move fast. Update the ledger, or I will cancel the entire regional contract and bring in a supplier from the city." "Are we clear? Excellent. Send the confirmation to my email." Tyler disconnected the call with a sharp swipe of his finger, grinning at my mother. He immediately dialed the next number, his arrogance inflating with every successful intimidation tactic. He called my luxury linen supplier, my groundskeeping contractor, and my private security firm, using the exact same aggressive, overpowering script. He talked over seasoned professionals, threatened to terminate long-standing agreements, and demanded that all financial channels bypass my name entirely. He wanted the resort's operational cash flow diverted straight into his failing personal LLC before the sun went down. Then he dialed the environmental compliance liaison, leaning back and propping his designer shoes on an empty chair. "I need to speak with the head of the, let me read this right, the Muncie Lenape Heritage Council," Tyler announced loudly, butchering the pronunciation of the indigenous tribe's name with painful ignorance. "And connect me with the Department of Environmental Conservation while you are at it." "Yes, Tyler Wilson. I am running the show now. Listen about the upcoming Phase 2 expansion near the southern ridge, he demanded, his voice thick with unearned authority. I am reviewing these ecological restrictions, and they are completely unacceptable. We are not doing manual soil testing for another 6 months. I have international investors flying in, and I want ground broken for the new spa facility by next week. I do not care about the heritage buffer zone. We are bringing in heavy machinery. We will pay whatever nominal fines the state issues later. That is how real estate works. Just push the permits through. The liaison on the other end of the line tried to interrupt, their voice tinny and frantic through the speakerphone, explaining that violating the heritage buffer zone would immediately trigger a federal shutdown. Tyler simply laughed, waving his hand in the air. "Do not lecture me on federal property law," Tyler snapped entirely, talking over the expert. "I manage skyscrapers in New York City. I know how to handle local zoning boards. You tell the tribal council and the environmental department that Wilson Legacy Holdings is bringing serious revenue into this county. If they want to keep their jobs and their funding, they will look the other way while we start construction. I expect revised permits on my desk by Monday morning." He hung up the phone with a triumphant slam, turning to me with his chest puffed out in arrogant dominance. "That is how you command an operation, Audrey. You do not ask for permission, you dictate terms. I just streamlined your entire supply chain and fast-tracked the expansion in 20 minutes. It is time for you to pack your bags and let the professionals take over." Listening to him mangle the name of the tribal leaders and blatantly threaten state officials made my blood run cold. He was completely oblivious to the delicate, highly volatile reality of what this property actually was. When my father left me this land, it was not just empty dirt waiting for a luxury hotel. It was a legally quarantined brownfield site. The soil was severely contaminated with heavy metals from decades of unregulated agricultural dumping. It took me 3 grueling years of my life to fix the catastrophic damage. I spent countless nights sitting in folding chairs at community town halls, humbly listening to the elders of the Indigenous Council. I worked directly with their ecological preservationists to design a water filtration system that honored the natural flow of the local river and protected their sacred spaces. I personally funded the toxic soil remediation, hiring specialized crews to remove tons of contaminated earth strictly by hand. We had to execute the entire excavation without heavy machinery, so we would not disturb the fragile ancestral burial grounds bordering the southern ridge. I had earned the respect of those environmental agencies and tribal leaders through intense transparency, endless patience, and depositing millions of dollars into highly restricted compliance bonds. It was the only reason the resort was legally allowed to open its doors to the public. My mother beamed with pride at Tyler reaching over to pat his hand. Uncle George nodded approvingly, muttering something about how it was refreshing to see a real businessman cut through the bureaucratic red tape. They cheered for him as he aggressively bulldozed through 3 years of complex legal diplomacy in a single phone call. Malik sat quietly, his eyes darting between Tyler's phone and my motionless figure. Perhaps the only person in the room smart enough to recognize the catastrophic legal misstep Tyler had just committed. Tyler had absolutely no idea that those permits were exclusively mine. Before I could even vocalize the catastrophic legal danger Tyler had just triggered with the environmental agencies, the heavy oak doors of the VIP dining room swung open. Simon, my hand-picked director of operations, stepped into the room. He was clutching the thick leather-bound master operational ledgers and a secure encrypted hard drive. I had personally recruited Simon away from a premier luxury hotel brand 2 years ago when his career was stagnating. I mentored him, paid him significantly above market rate, and trusted him with the most intimate logistical details of the estate. He knew about the environmental compliance bonds. He knew about the fragile ecosystem of our local partnerships. He knew exactly how much personal financial risk I had taken to ensure his department had the best resources available. When he walked in, I assumed he was here to deliver my afternoon briefing and put an immediate stop to Tyler's reckless phone calls. Instead, Simon kept his gaze fixed firmly on the polished wood floor. He walked right past my chair at the end of the table. He marched straight to the head of the room and placed the entire stack of master files directly into Tyler's waiting hands. Tyler grinned, slapping Simon enthusiastically on the back. "Excellent timing, Simon. Glad to see you are ready to play for the winning team. Let us get these accounts migrated immediately." I sat perfectly still, my eyes locked on the man I had mentored. "Simon," I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady, "what exactly are you doing?" Simon shifted his weight from one foot to the other, nervously adjusting his silk tie. He finally looked up, his expression a cowardly mixture of guilt and defensive arrogance. "I am sorry, Audrey," he muttered, though his tone held zero genuine remorse. "But I have to look out for my own career trajectory." Tyler and Diana approached me earlier this morning. We had a very long, very realistic conversation about the future of this property. I stared at him, dissecting his sudden shift in loyalty. "And what exactly did my brother promise you to buy your integrity after everything I have done for you?" Tyler intervened, puffing out his chest and resting his hand possessively on the master files. "I did not buy anything, Audrey. I simply offered Simon a compensation package that reflects his true value. I am giving him a 5% phantom equity stake in Wilson Legacy Holdings. When we take this resort international, he is going to be a multimillionaire. You are keeping him trapped on a basic salary with no real growth potential. You treated him like a glorified manager instead of an executive. I am making him a partner. I recognize talent when I see it, and I reward it appropriately." I kept my focus entirely on Simon. "You are handing over encrypted operational data to a man with absolutely no legal authority over this company for fake equity in a shell corporation." Simon crossed his arms, leaning into the justification he had clearly rehearsed in his head. "It is not just about the equity, Audrey. It is about the optics. I spoke with the representatives from the London venture capital firm yesterday. They are incredibly nervous about the upcoming Phase 2 expansion. They know about your past. They know you took 6 months off a few years ago for mental health reasons. They feel that running a $50 million international expansion is too much pressure for someone with your specific emotional history." My mother let out a loud, validating sigh, nodding vigorously at Simon's words. "Exactly," she agreed. "We are all just being realistic about your limitations." Simon nodded back at her, emboldened by Diana's support. "The international investors want a strong male figurehead to lead Phase 2, he stated, looking me directly in the eye with breathtaking sexism. "They want someone aggressive, someone with Wall Street experience who can project absolute dominance in the boardroom. Tyler provides that masculine stability. The backers simply do not trust a woman who might crack under the pressure of global negotiations. They need to see a firm, unwavering hand at the wheel, someone who commands respect without having to ask for it. It is nothing personal, Audrey. It is just business. The market demands a traditional executive presence, and I have to align myself with the leadership structure that guarantees the resort's survival. Your methods were fine for a startup, but we are scaling now. We need a man who understands aggressive corporate expansion, not someone who wants to hold hands with the local historical societies." I remained entirely silent, sitting in my chair as I watched the grotesque spectacle unfold before me. I watched my brother eagerly tear open the leather-bound ledgers, his eyes scanning financial projections he did not possess the basic literacy to comprehend. I watched my mother pour Simon a celebratory glass of sparkling water, welcoming him into their circle of thieves with open arms. I watched my aunts and uncles lean over the table, excitedly pointing at blueprints and employee rosters, acting as if they had just struck gold. They were dismantling my empire piece by piece right in front of my face. They were carving up 3 years of my blood, sweat, and sleepless nights like a roasted turkey at a holiday dinner. Tyler began dividing up the departments, assigning my marketing budget to his country club friends, and promising my mother a massive suite for her personal use. He even started talking about firing my hand-picked culinary team to bring in some flashy, overpriced chef from the city, just for the public relations value. They stripped away my achievements, my credibility, and my ownership, packaging it all into a neat little box for my brother to claim as his own. But as I watched them revel in their stolen glory, a profound sense of calm washed over me. I knew that every single document Simon had just handed over required my biometric authorization to execute any actual bank transfers. I knew that the phantom equity Tyler promised was legally worthless. They thought they had successfully executed a corporate coup, blinding themselves with their own greed and sexist assumptions. I did not interrupt their celebration. I did not try to reason with people who had already decided I was entirely disposable. I sat quietly and catalogued every single sin, knowing that when I finally dropped the hammer, the destruction of their delusions would be absolute and inescapable. The atmosphere inside the VIP dining room grew dense, suffocating me with psychological warfare my family had perfected. I remained seated at the far end of the table, surrounded by the people who had just sold me out. To them, my silence was total surrender. They spoke over me, erasing my presence from the room, just as easily as they erased my name from the operational manifest. My mother leaned forward, placing a manicured hand over Simon's forearm in a display of affection she rarely showed me. "You made the right choice today, Simon." Diana purred, her voice dripping with sweetness. "Loyalty to the Wilson family is always rewarded. We need men with your sharp pragmatism to help Tyler steer this ship. Audrey means well, but she lets emotions cloud her judgment. You protected the investors today. We consider you part of our inner circle now." Simon glowed under her validation, his chest puffing out as he eagerly agreed with every demeaning word she spoke. He was blinded by her flattery, unaware Diana would throw him under a bus the second his usefulness expired. To Tyler's right, Malik Jackson remained an efficient machine. The Wall Street litigator ignored the petty insults. Malik operated purely on logic and power, deploying both to finalize my execution. He methodically flipped through the master files Simon had surrendered, his fountain pen flying across the margins as he drafted the formal handover addendums. Every scratch of Malik's pen was a calculated move to ensure I had zero administrative authority left by tomorrow morning. "Let us get these vendor transition notices filed with the state immediately," Malik instructed, his deep voice slicing through the chatter. "Tyler, you need to sign these transfer authorizations as the acting operational director. Audrey's biometric blocks on the banking software will take a few days to legally bypass, but these physical documents give us the immediate administrative control we need to reassure the London venture capitalists." Tyler snatched the documents, scribbling his signature with aggressive, triumphant strokes. He looked down the length of the table at me, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. "I think we are done here," Audrey, Tyler announced, waving his hand dismissively. "The executive board needs to discuss the international expansion strategy, and you are not cleared for that level of financial data. Go back to your room and pack up your belongings. Do not worry about the resort. The adults have everything under control." The sheer weight of their collective betrayal pressed against my chest, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I stood up, smoothing the fabric of my tailored blazer. I looked at Malik, who briefly met my gaze with cold professional detachment, unaware that his brilliant legal mind was currently backing a massive financial fraud. I looked at Simon, who cowardly averted his eyes. Finally, I looked at my mother, whose face was a mask of victorious cruelty. "I will leave you to your strategy," I said, my voice steady and chillingly calm. I turned and walked out of the VIP dining room, the heavy oak doors clicking shut behind me. The chaotic noise of their celebration was instantly cut off, leaving me alone in the pristine corridor of the resort I had built. My heart beat with a slow, measured rhythm. There was no overwhelming wave of grief. The claustrophobia of the dining room evaporated, replaced by a razor-sharp, calculating survival instinct. They had pushed me out of the inner circle, but they had no idea I secretly controlled the entire board. I reached the end of the corridor and entered the private owner's suite, a secluded wing completely isolated from the guest areas. I stepped inside and locked the reinforced door. The suite was totally silent, a sanctuary of absolute control. I walked directly to the solid oak desk sitting by the expansive window overlooking the valley. I reached under the desk and pulled out a heavy matte black steel lockbox. I input a complex numeric sequence, opened the lid, and extracted my secure encrypted laptop. This was not the standard resort computer Simon had handed over to Tyler. This was my personal command center, operating on an entirely independent, highly secured network. I placed the laptop on the desk. A biometric scanner blinked, waiting for my fingerprint. I pressed my thumb against the sensor. The screen instantly flared to life, displaying layers of encrypted financial data, offshore holding accounts, and corporate ownership structures nobody in my family even knew existed. They thought my power resided in the vendor files Simon had stolen. They were completely wrong. My real power lived inside the holding companies, the venture capital funds, and the massive leverage I secretly held over their entire lives. I opened a secure communication channel to my private financial legal team in Manhattan. I did not need to fight Tyler for control of the resort. I just needed to pull the strings on the massive debt he had accumulated. I began compiling the raw data, gathering the fraudulent loan documents Tyler had signed, the mob-backed financial transfers my mother had secretly guaranteed, and the complete ownership structure of Apex Capital, the venture fund I solely owned. I organized the federal reporting documents, formatting the exact evidence required by the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority and the Internal Revenue Service. I worked with the precision of an executioner preparing the gallows. Tyler wanted to play the role of the ruthless Wall Street executive. Diana wanted to sacrifice me to save her golden boy's reputation. Malik wanted to use his brilliant legal mind to orchestrate a hostile takeover. They had exactly 36 hours left on my clock. I sat in the quiet of my secure suite, the glow of the laptop illuminating my calm, focused face. I prepared the final digital signatures that would trigger their destruction, knowing that when I finally emerged from this room, they would lose absolutely everything. 24 hours later, the grand hall of the resort was completely transformed into a spectacle of unearned victory. My mother had wasted absolutely no time orchestrating what she called an impromptu celebration, though the sheer scale of the event proved she had been planning this ambush for weeks. Diana had hijacked the main ballroom, a space I designed to showcase the natural beauty of the Hudson Valley, and turned it into a shrine for her golden child. I stood on the mezzanine balcony, hidden in the shadows of the architectural timber, watching the grotesque display unfold below me. The audacity was breathtaking. My mother had ordered the resort management team to unlock my private reserve wine cellars. Cases of extremely rare vintage champagne that I had personally sourced from boutique vineyards in France were being popped and poured with reckless abandon. These were bottles I had earmarked for our 5-year anniversary celebration, now being handed out to people who did not even know how to pronounce the name of the estate. The catering was equally infuriating. I spent 2 years building an organic culinary program. Now my executive chef was being forced to serve truffles and caviar on silver platters, reducing my sustainable vision to a flashy country club buffet. My staff, the men and women I had trained and paid fair living wages, were wearing stiff white gloves and rushing around the room to accommodate the demanding whims of my family. I saw the head concierge, a brilliant woman I had promoted just last month, forced to hold Diana's designer coat while my mother paraded around the room dripping in diamonds. The floral arrangements alone must have cost tens of thousands of dollars, billed directly to the operational accounts Simon handed over to Tyler. My brother had effectively stolen my corporate credit card to throw himself a massive coronation party. The room was packed with the region's elite. Mayors, city council members, real estate developers, and wealthy socialites clinked their glasses together, entirely oblivious to the hostile takeover they were celebrating. They drank my wine, ate my food, and stood inside the walls I had built, while my family acted as if I had never existed at all. The erasure was swift, brutal, and entirely calculated. Diana floated through the crowd, her voice carrying up to the balcony as she greeted a group of prominent Manhattan investors. She pointed at the vaulted ceilings and the living green walls, boasting about the impeccable Wilson family taste. She never mentioned the environmental permits or the toxic soil. She simply gestured to the beauty of the room and told everyone how proud she was of her son. The sheer volume of stolen resources on display was staggering, but I kept my breathing steady, watching them drain their own stolen accounts. Down on the main floor, Tyler was completely in his element, playing the role of the visionary genius to absolute perfection. He stood in the center of a large group of local politicians and wealthy venture capitalists, holding a glass of my stolen champagne and gesturing wildly with his free hand. He wore a brand new custom-tailored tuxedo that screamed desperation, projecting the exact image of a Wall Street conqueror bringing civilization to the wilderness. I leaned slightly over the balcony railing, listening as his booming voice carried over the jazz quartet my mother had hired. Tyler was actively rewriting history right in front of my face. He pointed through the massive glass windows toward the southern ridge, explaining his brilliant strategy for the land remediation. He claimed the toxic cleanup was his idea from the very beginning, describing the grueling negotiations with the environmental protection agencies, as if he had been sitting in those folding chairs instead of me. I heard him tell a prominent state senator how he personally conceptualized the sustainable water filtration system to protect the local river ecosystem. The senator nodded enthusiastically, completely captivated by Tyler's fabricated brilliance. Then the true nausea set in. Tyler began discussing the tribal relations. He bragged to a group of investors about how he had masterminded the delicate diplomacy with the indigenous elders, claiming he had single-handedly secured their blessing for the resort. He still could not pronounce the name of the tribe correctly, stumbling over the syllables, but his audience of wealthy developers did not care. They simply applauded his aggressive corporate tactics, praising him for cutting through the red tape that usually paralyzed commercial builds in this county. Tyler soaked up their validation like a sponge, laughing loudly and clapping the men on the back. He was charming, charismatic, and entirely hollow. He spoke about the upcoming Phase 2 expansion, with alarming confidence, promising the investors massive returns and accelerated construction timelines that blatantly violated the strict ecological bounds I had established. He was selling them a fantasy built on a foundation of severe federal violations, completely ignorant of the legal landmines he was tap dancing across. Malik stood a few feet away, watching Tyler schmooze the crowd with a look of intense, calculated satisfaction. The Wall Street litigator had done his job perfectly, clearing the path for the golden child to shine. They all believed the transition of power was final. They believed the applause and the clinking glasses validated their theft. Tyler raised his glass high in the air, proposing a toast to the bright, lucrative future of Wilson Legacy Holdings. The crowd roared in agreement, completely mesmerized by the illusion. I stepped back from the balcony railing, retreating into the shadows. Let them drink the champagne. Let them take the credit. Let Tyler spin his fairy tales to the politicians and the investors. Every single boast he made, every handshake he shared, and every lie he told was just another nail in his own coffin. I took a slow, very deep breath, perfectly content to sit and wait. They were throwing a lavish, utterly ridiculous victory party on a rapidly sinking ship. A silver spoon striking a crystal champagne flute cut through the ambient noise of the grand ballroom. The jazz quartet ceased playing. The low murmur of wealthy developers and local politicians faded into a respectful silence. Down on the main floor, Diana stood positioned under the center chandelier, radiating the authority of a society matriarch. She held her glass high, waiting for every single eye in the room to lock onto her before she spoke. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," my mother began, projecting theatrical warmth. "We gathered to celebrate not just a beautiful property, but a profound family legacy. When my husband passed away 3 years ago, he left us a vision. He saw the untapped potential of the Hudson Valley, knowing our family had the grit to transform raw earth into modern luxury. But great visions require extraordinary leadership." She turned her gaze to Tyler, placing a perfectly manicured hand affectionately on his shoulder. Tyler puffed out his chest, looking incredibly solemn and heroic. "Building a $50 million eco-resort requires aggressive financial strategy and corporate stamina," Diana continued. For 3 years, my son Tyler worked tirelessly behind the scenes. While managing real estate funds in Manhattan, he was the invisible architect of this project. He secured the hidden capital. He drafted master blueprints. He navigated international investment banking to ensure Wilson Legacy Holdings had the financial bedrock to pull off this miracle. The sheer magnitude of the lie hit me like a physical blow. Tyler never saw a single blueprint. He never spoke to an investor until yesterday. But the entire crowd drank in every word, nodding in deep admiration at the fictional genius standing before them. Of course, Diana said, her voice dropping into a register of sickeningly sweet, patronizing affection. We must also acknowledge the sweet, helpful caretaker who kept the home fires burning. My daughter Audrey is here tonight. A few heads turned, scanning the crowd, but I remained completely hidden. Audrey was our quiet helper, Diana announced, dripping poisoned honey. When her father passed, Audrey was going through a fragile period. She needed a distraction, a quiet place away from the corporate world to heal. So we gave her this project as a therapeutic outlet. We let her act as property manager, checking gates, supervising landscaping, and keeping the dirt warm, while Tyler masterminded the massive financial structures in New York. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. She was entirely erasing my existence. She was taking my 3 years of agonizing, brutal labor, the nights I slept on an air mattress in a freezing barn to guard construction equipment, the months of intense legal battles with environmental agencies, the sheer financial terror of staking my entire life savings on a ruined plot of land and reducing it all to a therapeutic hobby for a mentally unstable girl. Audrey did a lovely job keeping the grounds tidy, Diana continued, ensuring her voice echoed clearly for every politician and investor to hear. She was a wonderful little placeholder. But as we all know, managing a garden is very different from managing a global hospitality empire. The time for healing hobbies has passed. The resort is fully operational now, and it is time for the adults to take the wheel. The market demands fierce, unwavering masculine leadership to guide our Phase 2 expansion into international territories. It requires a man who understands aggressive growth, complex zoning laws, and ruthless financial maneuvering. She looked back at Tyler, her eyes shining with fake manufactured tears of pride. Tyler, you stepped down from your incredibly successful Manhattan firm to save this project and elevate our family name, Diana declared, lying with such absolute conviction that she likely believed it herself. You sacrificed your own comfort to ensure your sister's little project did not bankrupt our family. You took the reins when we needed a true captain. Your father is looking down right now, bursting with pride at the man you have become. You are the undisputed future of Wilson Legacy Holdings. The ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. Wealthy investors raised their glasses high in the air. Local politicians stepped forward to shake Tyler's hand, congratulating him on his brilliant sacrifice and visionary leadership. Tyler beamed, soaking in the stolen adulation, nodding humbly, as if he had actually endured 3 years of grueling environmental cleanup. Malik Jackson stood near the front, clapping slowly, his sharp eyes surveying the room, fully approving of the flawless public relations execution his mother-in-law had just performed. I stood alone on the dark balcony, watching my mother systematically execute my character and my career in front of the most powerful people in the entire state. She had weaponized my gender, my past grief, and my quiet dedication, twisting them into tools for my own destruction. She had publicly stripped me of all credit, ensuring that if I ever tried to claim ownership of the resort, the entire business community would view me as a delusional, jealous sister trying to steal her brilliant brother's thunder. It was the ultimate betrayal, executed with flawless societal precision. They had taken everything from me and smiled while doing it. But as the applause echoed through the vaulted ceilings of my resort, a profound, icy calm settled deeply into my bones. The erasure was complete. My mother had just severed the very last string of obligation and familial loyalty tying me to her. They had publicly claimed the throne, totally unaware that the crown they were wearing was rigged to explode. I turned away from the balcony railing, stepping back into the quiet darkness of the second-floor corridor. I did not need to hear the rest of the toasts. The narrative was cemented. My family had dug their own graves on a stage of their own making, and right now it was finally time for me to hand them the heavy shovels. I began walking toward the grand staircase, ready to face the final fatal encounter with my brother. I descended the grand staircase, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The applause from the ballroom was still ringing through the walls, a sickening echo of my mother's fabricated reality. Before I reached the private corridor leading to the exit, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder, spinning me around with aggressive force. It was Tyler. He slipped away from his adoring crowd of investors, his face flushed with unearned victory. He dragged me into a secluded alcove near the coat check, safely out of sight from the main hall. His grip was too tight, a physical manifestation of the control he believed he possessed. He shoved a thick manila envelope against my chest. "Read it and sign it, Audrey," he commanded, his breath smelling of the champagne he stole from my reserve. "We are ending this tonight." I did not flinch. I slowly took the envelope and pulled out a stack of documents printed on heavy cardstock. The header at the top of the first page read, "Voluntary Resignation and Asset Transfer Agreement." I scanned the terms, my eyes landing on the compensation clause. My brother was offering me a buyout of exactly $50,000. $50,000 for a $50 million resort? I stated, my voice barely a whisper. You cannot even buy a luxury sedan for that amount, let alone a global hospitality empire. Tyler leaned in close, crowding my personal space. His eyes narrowed with malice. "Consider it a generous severance package for your gardening services," he sneered. "Sign the paper, take the cash, and disappear to some cheap apartment in the city. If you fight me on this, you walk away with absolutely nothing." I looked at the signature line, feeling my brother bearing down on me. "I will not sign a fraudulent document, Tyler," I replied evenly. "You cannot enforce an extortion attempt with a pathetic buyout." Tyler let out a low, predatory laugh. He reached out and tapped the thick stack of paper in my hands. "Turn to page 4, little sister. Go ahead, read the stipulations Malik drafted for you." I flipped to the 4th page. My eyes scanned the dense legal jargon, tracing the aggressive clauses drafted by my brother-in-law. The words seemed to jump off the page: financial misconduct, misappropriation of corporate assets, federal wire fraud. Tyler stepped so close I could feel the heat radiating from his flushed face. "Malik is a very thorough lawyer," Audrey, Tyler whispered, his tone turning lethally sharp. "He spent the entire afternoon reviewing your operational ledgers. He noticed you moved millions of dollars into highly restricted compliance bonds and paid massive cash sums to specialized environmental contractors, to an aggressive federal prosecutor that does not look like a toxic soil cleanup. That looks exactly like an elaborate, highly illegal money laundering scheme." My pulse remained perfectly steady, but a cold realization began to wash over me. "You are threatening to frame me for embezzlement," I asked, my voice deadly quiet. "You are going to use the environmental remediation I funded to accuse me of financial crimes." Tyler smiled, a genuinely terrifying expression of pure greed. "We are not just threatening, Audrey. We are completely prepared to execute. Malik has already drafted the federal complaint. If you do not sign that transfer agreement tonight, Malik will submit that complaint directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation tomorrow morning. He will claim you used the eco-resort construction as a front to embezzle venture capital funds. He will argue that your payouts to the indigenous tribal councils and those boutique environmental crews were actually fraudulent shell company transfers." I stared at him, letting the magnitude of his blackmail fill the cramped alcove. "You know those were legitimate ecological bonds, Tyler. You know I saved this land." Tyler shrugged, completely indifferent to the truth. "The truth does not matter in a federal indictment, Audrey. Malik is a Wall Street litigator. He knows exactly how to spin complex financial data to make you look like a master criminal. He will paint you as a desperate, unstable woman who stole millions to fund a lavish lifestyle. With your history of depression, the prosecutors will eat up the narrative of a frantic, mentally fragile woman making erratic, illegal financial decisions." Tyler continued, twisting the knife even further. The investors will testify against you just to protect their own assets. You will be indicted, dragged through a devastating public trial, and slapped with a federal prison sentence. He grabbed my wrist, squeezing it tightly. Sign the paper for $50,000, Audrey. If you refuse, Malik hits send and you will spend the next 20 years rotting in a federal penitentiary while I run this resort anyway. The choice is yours. I looked down at the legal documents in my hands, the crisp white pages feeling suddenly heavier in the dim light. They were not just stealing my hard work to salvage Tyler's ruined reputation. My own mother, my brother, and my brother-in-law were actively conspiring to send me to federal prison. They were perfectly willing to strip away my freedom, brand me a convicted felon, and lock me in a concrete cell for decades to cover his debt. They would sacrifice my entire life and my future without a single ounce of hesitation. Blood meant absolutely nothing to any of them. Family was just a weapon they used to extract compliance. The ultimate betrayal was no longer just about money. It was now entirely about my physical and emotional survival. They saw nothing but a disposable pawn, a scapegoat they could slaughter to secure their wealth. The last ember of familial obligation inside me died, turning into pure, unbreakable ice. I was no longer dealing with relatives. I was dealing with ruthless predators, and it was time to show them how a real apex predator hunts. I took a slow, steady breath, meeting Tyler's arrogant stare, preparing to deliver the final strike. I shifted my gaze past Tyler's shoulder, looking through the arched doorway that led back into the grand ballroom. My mother stood under the warm glow of the crystal chandelier, holding a fresh glass of my vintage champagne. She was watching us. She could see exactly what was happening in this shadowed alcove. She saw Tyler cornering me against the wall, physically blocking my exit. She saw the thick stack of legal documents thrust against my chest. Diana knew exactly what those pages contained, and she knew the devastating federal threats Tyler was currently whispering into my ear. Our eyes met across the crowded room. I looked at the woman who had brought me into this world, the woman I had spent 33 years trying to make proud. I searched her face for a single flicker of hesitation, a tiny fraction of maternal instinct, a momentary realization that sending her own daughter to a federal penitentiary was a line she could not cross. Diana held my gaze with absolute, unyielding coldness. There was no hesitation. There was no guilt. Her eyes were flat and calculating, assessing my trapped physical state with the detached satisfaction of a predator watching a successful hunt. Then, with deliberate and chilling precision, my mother turned her back on me. She seamlessly rejoined the circle of wealthy politicians, throwing her head back in a bright artificial laugh, as if she had not just authorized my complete destruction. In that exact moment, something fundamental inside my chest violently snapped. It was not a loud explosion. It was the quiet, absolute severing of the final thread tying me to my family. Every desperate childhood hope for my mother's approval, every exhausting attempt to prove my worth, every late night spent building an empire just to show them I was capable, evaporated into thin air. The daughter who wanted to be loved completely died. In her place, a cold, calculating architect of ruin was born. I felt the last drop of familial obligation drain from my veins. They had pushed me past the point of pain, past the point of anger, and straight into a realm of pure, unadulterated clarity. I was no longer looking at my mother or my brother. I was looking at hostile assets that needed to be aggressively liquidated. The psychological shift was total and irreversible. They had just given me the absolute moral permission to destroy them without a single ounce of mercy. I took a slow, deep breath. The lingering smell of Tyler's cologne mixed with the faint scent of the floral arrangements drifting from the ballroom. I realized that my entire life had been a series of concessions, constantly shrinking myself so their fragile egos could expand. I had funded their lifestyles, protected their secrets, and absorbed their constant insults, all under the misguided belief that blood demanded loyalty. Diana turning her back was the greatest gift she could have ever given me. She liberated me from the toxic illusion of our family. I was completely free. I turned my attention back to Tyler. He was growing impatient, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, completely oblivious to the profound psychological transformation that had just occurred right in front of him. He reached into the inner pocket of his custom tuxedo jacket and pulled out a heavy gold pen. He clicked it open and shoved it toward my face. "Sign the paper!" Audrey Tyler demanded, his voice thick with arrogant urgency. "Stop stalling. Malik has the federal complaint ready to file. Take the $50,000 and disappear, or I promise you will lose a lot more than just this resort." I reached out and took the gold pen from his hand. The metal felt cold and heavy against my fingers. I looked down at the crisp white pages of the voluntary resignation and asset transfer agreement. The legal jargon was dense, carefully crafted by Malik to strip me of every single operational right, every financial claim, and every shred of authority over the empire I had built. It was a masterpiece of corporate theft. I stepped away from the wall, moving toward a small decorative table in the corner of the alcove. I smoothed the document flat against the polished wood surface. I did not hesitate. I did not let my hand tremble. I pressed the tip of the pen to the signature line on the final page and signed my name with sweeping, flawless strokes. I flipped to the administrative addendums and signed those as well, authorizing the immediate transfer of operational control to Tyler Wilson. I capped the gold pen with a sharp, decisive click. I gathered the signed document, squared the edges perfectly, and turned back to face my brother. I held the stack of paper out to him. Tyler snatched the documents from my hand, a massive, victorious grin spreading across his face. He looked at my signature, letting out a loud sigh of profound relief, believing he had just secured his salvation and his fortune. I looked Tyler dead in the eye. The lobby music seemed to fade into total silence. "I will sign this," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm, even whisper. "But I want you to remember this exact moment for the rest of your life." Tyler scoffed, entirely missing the lethal weight of my words. He tucked the signed agreement into his jacket, straightening his lapels with immense satisfaction. "I will remember the night I finally put you in your place, Audrey," he sneered, turning to walk back toward the waiting applause. I stood silently in the shadowed alcove all alone, watching him march straight toward his own execution. He had his piece of paper. He had his fake title. He had his stolen vintage champagne. But he had absolutely no idea that by forcing my signature, he had just triggered the catastrophic collapse of his entire world. I walked calmly down the private corridor toward the rear exit, pushing through the heavy glass doors and stepping out into the freezing, cool night air. I had exactly 12 hours left to prepare the final, devastating checkmate that would end this. 12 hours later, the crisp morning sun broke over the beautiful Hudson Valley, flooding the massive executive boardroom with blinding natural light. The 36-hour deadline had officially expired. Inside the glass-enclosed meeting space, the atmosphere was thick with the stagnant scent of stale champagne and arrogant satisfaction. Tyler slouched at the head of the massive reclaimed wood conference table, nursing a severe hangover behind expensive dark sunglasses. He had casually draped his expensive suit jacket over the back of my custom ergonomic chair, looking every bit the conqueror surveying his plundered spoils. A half-empty glass carafe of spicy Bloody Marys sat directly in the center of the table, alongside a sprawling mess of catered breakfast pastries that none of them had actually touched. My mother, Diana, sat to his right, sipping a black coffee. She looked thoroughly exhausted, but extremely triumphant, her posture radiating the toxic relief of a woman who had successfully executed a flawless corporate hijacking to protect her precious golden child. She reached out and affectionately patted the thick stack of recently signed transfer agreements resting perfectly centered on the table. Beside her, Malik Jackson looked immaculate. The Wall Street litigator showed absolutely no signs of fatigue from the aggressive celebration last night. He was already dressed in a fresh, razor-sharp navy suit, meticulously organizing the legal filings into sleek leather folders. "We file the notarized addendums with the state registry by noon," Malik stated, his deep voice cutting through the sluggish morning air. "The biometric blocks on the operational accounts should be completely overridden by the end of the business day." "Tyler," You will have unrestricted access to the liquid capital by tomorrow morning. Tyler let out a low, victorious groan, rubbing his temples while grinning from ear to ear. I cannot believe she actually folded that fast, he bragged, leaning back and lacing his hands behind his head. I thought we would have to drag her out of here, kicking and screaming. Did you see her face when I handed her the $50,000 buyout? She looked absolutely terrified. I told you, Mom. Audrey talks a big game, but the second you apply real aggressive corporate pressure, she completely shatters. Diana offered a tight, validating smile, adjusting her diamond tennis bracelet. She always was fundamentally weak, Tyler. You did the right thing taking control. The investors need a steady masculine hand, not a fragile girl playing hotel manager. The heavy double doors of the boardroom suddenly swung open, hitting the rubber wall stops with a sharp echoing crack that made Tyler physically jump in his seat. The smug laughter died instantly in his throat. I stepped over the threshold wearing a tailored ivory power suit, looking perfectly rested and utterly lethal. I did not walk in alone. I was flanked by two imposing men in sharply cut dark suits. They wore identical expressions of cold bureaucratic authority, carrying heavy briefcases and official credentials clipped to their breast pockets. The sudden power dynamic shift in the room was palpable and immediate. The oxygen seemed to instantly vaporize from the boardroom. Malik froze his hand, hovering mid-air over his legal documents, his brilliant litigator instincts instantly recognizing the sheer terrifying weight of the men standing beside me. These were not local police officers or private security guards. They radiated federal jurisdiction. "Good morning, everyone," I announced, my voice ringing with absolute freezing clarity. "I hope you enjoyed the champagne last night." Tyler yanked off his sunglasses, his bloodshot eyes darting nervously between me and the two men. "Audrey, what the hell is this?" he demanded, attempting to inject his usual booming authority into his voice, though it cracked pathetically. "I told you to pack your bags and leave the property. You have absolutely no authorization to be in this boardroom. This is a highly confidential executive meeting. Security should have escorted you off the premises hours ago." I ignored him completely, stepping confidently toward the long mahogany table. I placed my hands on the polished wood, leaning forward to look my brother dead in the eye. "You are entirely correct about one thing, Tyler," I replied smoothly. "This is a highly confidential executive meeting, which is exactly why I brought the appropriate guests to verify your new administrative status." I gestured gracefully to the man standing on my right. "This is Special Agent Harrison from the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority." I then turned to the man on my left. "And this is Special Agent Miller from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division." My mother gasped, her coffee cup rattling violently against the saucer as her hands began to shake. Malik immediately stood up, his jaw clenched tight, his legal mind racing to assess the catastrophic legal ambush unfolding in real time. "They are here to conduct an immediate, unannounced audit of Wilson Legacy Holdings." I continued, my gaze sweeping across their horrified faces. "Since you were so incredibly eager to sign those transfer agreements last night, Tyler, you legally assume total operational and financial liability for every single corporate entity attached to this property. That includes the deeply buried capital pipelines and the highly leveraged loans you used to fund your fake takeover." Tyler stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, his face draining of all color. "You cannot do this," he stammered, his arrogance rapidly dissolving into sheer panic. "You signed the resignation papers. I am the chief executive officer. You have no power here anymore." I smiled, a sharp, predatory expression that finally made my mother realize the catastrophic mistake they had made. "Exactly," I whispered, stepping back to let the federal agents approach the table. "You are the CEO, Tyler, which means you are officially the primary target of a massive federal fraud investigation. I just handed you the steering wheel to a speeding car that has no brakes, and the cliff is right in front of you. Gentlemen, the floor is all yours." Special Agent Harrison stepped forward, sliding a thick dossier onto the center of the mahogany table. The cover bore a red stamp indicating a federal inquiry. I placed my hand firmly on top of the file. I did not look at the resort documents. I did not care about the operational handover they had just celebrated. My target was the foundation of Tyler's entire fabricated existence. Tyler stared at the stamp, his breathing becoming shallow. "What is this, Audrey?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "You brought the government here over a simple family business transition. You are completely out of your mind." I slid the dossier precisely across the polished wood until it hit Tyler's coffee cup with a sharp clink. "I am definitely not here to fight over the resort, Tyler. You wanted to be the chief executive officer, and you signed the paperwork. Congratulations. But before you start spending the operational budget, we need to discuss your other highly lucrative ventures. Let us talk about your Manhattan real estate fund." Diana scoffed loudly, trying to maintain her posture despite the panic radiating from her eyes. "Do not be ridiculous. Tyler's fund in the city is highly respected. He simply had a difficult quarter due to market fluctuations. Every major investor experiences a temporary downturn. You have absolutely no right to scrutinize his primary business." I turned my gaze to my mother, my expression completely void of any familial warmth. "A difficult quarter?" I asked, letting the words hang in the freezing air of the boardroom. "Is that the bedtime story he told you to explain why he suddenly had to move his family out of the city?" "Mom, the Manhattan commercial real estate market is currently experiencing a historic boom. There is no downturn. Tyler did not lose money because the market shifted. He lost everything because his operation is a Ponzi scheme." Tyler slammed both hands onto the table, his face contorting in pure defensive rage. "That is slander," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "That is absolute actionable defamation. Malik, tell her she cannot say these things." Malik Jackson remained entirely silent. The Wall Street litigator did not jump to defend his brother-in-law. Instead, Malik's dark eyes locked onto the dossier, his legal instincts rapidly connecting the dots. He knew federal agents did not show up for simple family defamation. I opened the dossier, revealing a stack of highly detailed bank transfers and forensic accounting reports. "It is not defamation when I hold the bank records in my own hands, Tyler. You spent the last 3 years soliciting millions of dollars from high-net-worth individuals, promising them aggressive returns on luxury commercial developments. But you never actually bought any commercial properties. You never broke ground on a single project. You took the capital from your new investors and used it to pay fake dividends to your old investors, deliberately manipulating the statements to hide massive losses. You skimmed exorbitant fees right off the top to fund your lavish lifestyle, effectively stealing the retirement funds of dozens of hardworking families who trusted our surname." The ringing silence in the room became absolutely suffocating for everyone present. Diana stared at the bank records, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. "You lied to everyone." I continued, my voice steady and surgical, cutting through his fragile ego like a blade. "You bought custom suits, leased sports cars, and threw massive parties to project the illusion of overwhelming success. You needed everyone to believe you were the golden boy of the Wilson legacy. But the entire structure was built on stolen cash. 6 months ago, the new investor money dried up. The pyramid collapsed. The early investors demanded their payouts, and your accounts were completely empty." Tyler was visibly hyperventilating now, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. "You hacked my accounts," he accused, his voice dropping to a desperate, terrified whisper. "You illegally accessed my private financial data." "I did not need to hack anything," I corrected him calmly. "The federal government seized your accounts 3 weeks ago. Let us talk about your beautiful $4 million penthouse on the Upper East Side, the one Dad bought for you, the one you supposedly decided to sell because you wanted a quieter life for your children." Diana looked frantically at Tyler. "You sold the penthouse to free up liquid capital, Tyler. That is what you told me. You said you wanted to diversify the family portfolio." "He did not sell the penthouse." "Mom," I stated, delivering the fatal blow with absolute flawless precision while watching the color rapidly drain from her horrified face. "He lost it. The creditors seized the property. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings because Tyler defaulted on a massive, highly illegal collateral loan. He was literally evicted. The marshals showed up, changed the locks, and forced his wife and children out onto the street. That is why he is standing in my resort today, begging to take over my operations. He has absolutely nowhere else to go. Tyler lunged forward, swiping his arm across the table in a violent burst of panic, knocking the coffee cups onto the floor with a loud crash. "Shut up!" he screamed out, his face a mask of pure desperation. "You are actively trying to ruin me. You have always been jealous of me." Special Agent Harrison immediately stepped forward, his hand resting casually but firmly near his hip, signaling an immediate threat of physical restraint. "Mr. Wilson, sit down and keep your hands on the table," the agent commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of the federal government. Tyler collapsed back into his chair, breathing heavily, completely broken and physically shaking. The grand illusion of the untouchable golden child was finally and entirely destroyed. He was no longer the arrogant Wall Street conqueror. He was just a terrified criminal waiting for the cuffs. I shifted my focus away from the crumbling shell of my brother and turned my attention to the other side of the table. Malik Jackson sat perfectly rigid. The brilliant Wall Street litigator had remained uncharacteristically silent during my dismantling of Tyler. His sharp eyes were darting across the financial documents scattered on the mahogany surface, his formidable legal mind rapidly processing the catastrophic liability he had just stepped into. "Malik," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence of the boardroom, "you are widely considered one of the most ruthless and meticulous corporate attorneys in Manhattan. You destroy opposing counsel over improper commas in contract negotiations. You pride yourself on absolute airtight due diligence." Malik slowly raised his head, his dark eyes locking onto mine with the intense, calculating focus of a predator recognizing another apex predator. He did not defend Tyler. He immediately moved to protect himself. "My involvement in this transition was strictly limited to executing the operational handover based on the financial affidavits provided to me by your brother and your mother." Malik stated, his tone carefully measured and impeccably professional. "I was presented with certified proof of funds. I was acting on the premise of a legitimate family restructuring." I smiled, leaning forward and resting my palms on the table. Certified proof of funds. That is a fascinating phrase. Tell me, Malik, when Tyler promised to inject $10 million in liquid capital to fund the Phase 2 expansion of this resort, did you actually trace the origin of those funds? Or did you just take your mother-in-law at her word? Malik narrowed his eyes, his jaw tightening slightly. "I reviewed the bank statements, Audrey. The capital was clearly staged in a holding account under Wilson Legacy Holdings. Tyler provided sworn declarations that the money was a strategic reallocation from his Manhattan real estate fund. The documentation appeared entirely sound." "Appeared" being the operative word, I replied smoothly. "You are a man who deals in facts, Malik. Let us look at the facts." I slid a specific page from the red-stamped dossier across the table, positioning it directly in front of him. "Look at the routing numbers on that holding account. Look at the corporate entities that wired those $10 million into Tyler's control just 48 hours ago." Malik picked up the document. The room was dead silent except for the crisp rustle of the paper in his hands. I watched his eyes scan the lines of text. I watched the exact second his brilliant legal brain connected the dots. The subtle shift in his posture was unmistakable. His shoulders stiffened. The color drained slightly from his composed face. He placed the paper back on the table with deliberate, terrifying slowness. "You did not do your due diligence, Malik," I stated, twisting the knife. "You let family loyalty override your professional paranoia. You facilitated a hostile takeover of my $50 million resort based on forged financial declarations. You drafted legal handover documents for a man actively engaged in federal wire fraud. Do you know what the State Bar Association does to attorneys who blindly facilitate multi-million-dollar fraudulent acquisitions?" Malik did not flinch, but his voice lost its steady cadence, dropping into a harsh, controlled register. "These wire transfers did not originate from the Manhattan Fund." He looked directly at Tyler, his eyes burning with intense, undisguised fury. "The corporate identifiers on these routing numbers are completely masked." "Tyler, where exactly did this money come from?" Tyler kept his head down, staring at his hands physically shrinking under Malik's furious gaze. He mumbled something incomprehensible, entirely incapable of defending his lies, now that a federal agent and a Wall Street litigator were demanding answers. "Answer the question!" Tyler Malik barked, his voice echoing violently off the glass walls. "You sat in my office and swore on your father's legacy that this was clean capital from your investors. You told me the funds were cleared for immediate deployment. I staked my personal legal reputation on your compliance. Where did you get $10 million in liquid cash?" Tyler simply shook his head, looking like a cornered animal. He refused to speak. "I will answer that for you, Malik," I intervened, reclaiming control of the room. Tyler could not get the money from his investors because his investors had already seized his assets to recoup their stolen funds. No legitimate bank in the country would lend him a single dime. His credit is entirely destroyed. So desperate to save face and secure this resort, Tyler went far outside the traditional banking system. I picked up the final sheet of financial tracing from the dossier and held it up for Malik and the federal agents to see. Those routing numbers belong to a network of highly aggressive shell companies operating out of New Jersey. They are not venture capitalists or private equity firms. They are predatory lenders with direct ties to organized crime syndicates. Malik closed his eyes, letting out a sharp, furious breath as the reality of the situation fully settled in. He understood the severity of his exposure. "Tyler borrowed $10 million in illegal predatory mob money," I announced, my voice dropping like an anvil. "He took cash from violent loan sharks who charge exorbitant compounding interest rates. He brought criminal money into this family to fund a hostile takeover of my property. He thought he could steal my resort's legitimate revenue to pay back the syndicates before they came looking to collect. You did not just facilitate a corporate fraud, Malik. You helped Tyler launder $10 million of syndicate cash through Wilson Legacy Holdings." Malik physically recoiled from the table. He took 3 deliberate steps away from Tyler, severing their alliance. His face was a mask of cold fury and self-preservation. He looked at the federal agents, raising his hands. "I had absolutely no knowledge of the origin of these funds," Malik stated, his voice ringing with legal clarity. "I was retained to oversee the transfer based on fraudulent documents. I waive privilege regarding these declarations, and I will fully cooperate with the investigation." Tyler let out a pathetic whimper, sinking lower into his leather chair. But my attention was no longer on my broken brother. I turned my gaze slowly to the right, locking eyes with my mother. Diana sat frozen. The triumphant matriarch who had orchestrated my public humiliation just hours ago was now gripping her coffee cup so tightly her knuckles were white. She tried to maintain her posture, lifting her chin to project authority. "You can stop posturing, Mom," I said smoothly. "The audience is gone. It is just us, the federal government, and the catastrophic mess you created." Diana swallowed hard. "Tyler told me those loans were temporary bridge capital," she stammered, her voice lacking its venom. "He said he just needed a short-term cash injection to satisfy the venture capitalists until the resort revenue started flowing. He promised the interest rates were manageable." I reached into the red-stamped dossier and pulled out the final stack of documents. I tossed them onto the marble table. The heavy thud echoed through the silent boardroom. "You always blindly trusted him," I said, leaning over the table. "You spent your life believing Tyler was a financial genius simply because he is a man. You never questioned his methods. You never asked to see the math. If you had read the loan agreements before authorizing them, you would have realized that Tyler did not secure this $10 million loan. He could not. The syndicates ran a shadow background check. They knew his Manhattan fund was a Ponzi scheme. They knew the bank seized his penthouse. They refused to lend him a penny because he had absolutely zero collateral." Diana's eyes darted frantically to the documents. "What do you mean he did not secure the loan?" "The money is in the account. The money is in the account because you secured the loan," I clarified, dropping the ultimate bomb. "Tyler did not sign as primary guarantor. You did." I pushed the documents toward her. The top page displayed a massive, undeniable signature. It was her cursive handwriting inked directly onto a predatory lending agreement. "You wanted to save your golden boy," I continued, my voice echoing with surgical precision. You wanted to protect his fake reputation so badly that you bypassed your estate lawyers. You went behind the backs of the Wilson family board of directors. You signed a binding personal guarantee with violent, unregulated lenders. And do you know what you pledged as collateral, Mom? Do you know what you handed over to secure $10 million in mob money? Diana stared at her signature, her breath hitching in her throat. You leveraged the entire remaining Wilson family legacy, I stated, ticking the assets off on my fingers. You pledged the family investment portfolios. You pledged the stock options my father spent 40 years accumulating. You even pledged the deed to your own home. You put up your 5-bedroom Connecticut mansion as collateral for a loan with an illegally compounding interest rate that you could never repay. You signed away everything my father built, I added. You handed the keys to your entire life to criminal loan sharks because you refused to admit your son was a spectacular failure. You orchestrated a hostile takeover of my resort, plotting to send me to federal prison because you needed my legitimate revenue to cover your massive illegal debt. You thought my business would save your house. You thought you could sacrifice me to pay off the syndicates. But my biometric blocks held. You could not access the cash. The loan defaulted at midnight. The interest on a $10 million predatory loan does not accrue monthly. Mom, I explained. It compounds daily. By the time you finish drinking my vintage champagne last night and making your speeches about family legacy, you owed the syndicates an additional $2 million in penalty fees alone. You bet the entire Wilson family fortune on a man who does not even know how to read a basic balance sheet. And you lost absolutely everything. Diana lifted her shaking hands from the table. The expensive porcelain coffee cup she had been gripping suddenly slipped from her fingers. It hit the marble floor with a sharp crash, shattering into dozens of jagged pieces. Dark coffee splattered across her designer shoes and the pristine white rug, but she did not even flinch. The sound of breaking porcelain perfectly mirrored the utter destruction of her carefully curated reality. She looked at the documents, then at Tyler, and finally at me. The haughty matriarch who had ruled our family through fear and manipulation was completely gone. In her place sat a terrified, broken woman, staring down the barrel of total financial ruin. My house. Diana whispered, her voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched wheeze. My friends. The country club. Where will I go? She realized the absolute finality of her situation. The syndicates would not send polite collection notices. They would take her home. They would strip her of her wealth, her social standing, and her entire identity. The wealthy neighbors she spent decades trying to impress would watch her get evicted. The charity boards she chaired would publicly cast her out. She was facing immediate bankruptcy, and she had orchestrated every single step of her own downfall. She covered her face with her trembling hands, letting out an agonizing sob that echoed through the quiet boardroom. The golden cage had locked her outside. I watched my mother weep over her shattered porcelain cup, her manicured hands attempting to hide a face contorted by absolute defeat. Tyler remained slumped in his leather chair, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his financial incompetence. For 33 years, I had been conditioned to rush to their aid, to shrink myself, so their massive egos could occupy every inch of the room. I felt absolutely no remorse or sympathy for them now. I stepped carefully around the puddle of dark coffee seeping into the pristine white rug. I walked toward the sleek control panel embedded in the mahogany conference table. I pressed a single silver button. The heavy mechanical hum of the massive boardroom projector descending from the ceiling cut through the sound of Diana sobbing. The motorized blackout blind slid smoothly down over the expansive glass windows, plunging the room into a cool, cinematic darkness. A massive high-definition projection screen smoothly unrolled against the far wall of the room. Tyler lifted his head, his bloodshot eyes squinting against the sudden glare of the projector beam. Malik Jackson stood motionless near the door, his litigator instincts keeping him completely silent as he watched me execute the final phase of my strategy. Special Agent Harrison and Special Agent Miller stepped back, yielding the floor to me. I tapped the control console, casting a complex, brilliantly colored corporate flowchart onto the massive screen. It mapped out dozens of interconnected financial entities, offshore accounts, and holding firms. You both assumed the New Jersey shell companies that issued your predatory loan were invincible, I said, my voice projecting with the practiced, commanding cadence of a seasoned venture capitalist. You assumed you were dealing with street-level loan sharks who would break your legs and seize your properties. You fundamentally misunderstood the modern financial food chain. The people you borrowed money from are aggressive, certainly, but they are not the top predators in the market. I pressed a button highlighting a cluster of red boxes at the bottom of the flowchart. These red boxes represent the shell companies holding the $10 million loan you signed, Mom, I explained, aiming a laser pointer at the screen. They hold the deed to your Connecticut mansion. They hold Tyler's frozen accounts. They hold the family stock options you foolishly pledged as collateral. Yesterday, while you were drinking my stolen champagne and planning to send me to a federal penitentiary, those shell companies experienced a catastrophic liquidity crisis of their own. They desperately needed an immediate cash buyout. I clicked the remote again. A solid gold box appeared at the absolute top of the flowchart, with thick lines dropping down to swallow every single red box below it. So I continued pacing slowly across the front of the room. They sold their entire debt portfolio for pennies on the dollar to a massive venture capital firm, an aggressive equity fund that specializes in acquiring distressed debt and rapidly liquidating the underlying assets. That firm bought your $10 million loan outright. They bought the foreclosure rights to your home. They bought the liens on Tyler's non-existent penthouse. Tyler sat frozen in his seat and stared at the glowing golden box at the absolute top of the screen. The bold black letters inside the box read Apex Capital. You do not understand how venture capital works, Tyler, I stated, turning to face my brother. You spent your life pretending to play the game while I actually mastered it. When Dad died, he left me that ruined farmland, but Grandma left me a very small, quiet inheritance. You two laughed at my modest trust fund. You called it pocket change. But I took that pocket change and spent the last decade quietly investing in distressed tech startups and aggressive restructuring models. I compounded that money over and over again, totally hidden from your arrogant eyes. I stepped directly in front of the illuminated screen, letting the corporate diagram cast a stark light across my tailored ivory suit. I am not just a turnaround consultant, I announced, my voice dropping an octave, carrying the terrifying weight of absolute financial dominance. I am the sole owner and managing partner of Apex Capital. I am a self-made billionaire. The air completely left the room. Diana choked on a gasp, her hands dropping from her face as she stared at me with wide, horrified eyes. Malik finally let out a sharp breath, shaking his head as he fully processed the sheer scale of my hidden empire. Tyler looked like he had been struck by lightning. I bought your debt, Mom, I said, looking right at her. I bought the predatory loan you signed. I bought the mob syndicates right out from under you, which means the violent loan sharks are not coming to take your Connecticut mansion. I am. I turned my intense gaze back to my brother. You handed me a resignation paper last night, Tyler. You tried to buy my $50 million resort for $50,000 while holding a federal indictment to my head. You told me I was a failure who did not belong in this family. You told me I was completely irrelevant. I walked right up to his chair, leaning down until I was inches from his terrified face. I own your debt. Tyler, I whispered fiercely. I own the foreclosure rights to your penthouse. I own the family stock you tried to steal. I own you. Tyler shrank back into the leather upholstery, utterly defeated, completely stripped of his golden child armor. There was no inheritance left to save him. There was no mother left to bail him out. Diana sat paralyzed on the floor, the broken porcelain surrounding her designer shoes serving as the perfect metaphor for her shattered societal standing. They had actively plotted my total destruction, intending to leave me with nothing but a prison sentence. Instead, they had successfully handed me the permanent legal authority to erase them completely from the financial map. I stood tall, signaling the federal agents that the presentation was over, ready to watch them cart away the ashes of my toxic family. Special Agent Harrison stepped seamlessly past me, his leather shoes silent on the marble floor. He did not ask Tyler to politely stand up. He simply reached down, firmly grabbed my brother by the bicep of his expensive custom-tailored tuxedo, and hauled him forcefully to his feet. Tyler stumbled forward, his legs giving out completely, as the crushing reality of his situation short-circuited his brain. Agent Miller flanked him immediately on the left side, swiftly pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. The sharp metallic clink of the cuffs, ratcheting tightly around Tyler's wrists, echoed like a gunshot in the silent boardroom. Tyler Wilson. Agent Harrison stated, his voice a flat, uncompromising baritone. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, conspiracy to commit financial fraud, and money laundering. You have the absolute right to remain completely silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Tyler let out a sound that I had never heard a grown man make before. It was a high-pitched, guttural wail of absolute terror. He began twisting violently in the agent's grip, his expensive sunglasses clattering to the floor and snapping under Agent Miller's heel. "No, wait!" Tyler screamed, his face turning a blotchy, panicked red. "There is a massive, terrible mistake. You cannot legally arrest me. I am a true victim here. The investors lied to me. My sisters set me up. Tell them, Mom. Tell them I did not know where the money came from." He thrashed wildly, his polished veneer entirely evaporating, leaving behind nothing but a terrified, pathetic child throwing a desperate tantrum. The federal agents did not flinch. They expertly pinned his arms behind his back, locking him into a rigid hold that completely neutralized his frantic thrashing. Tyler realized physical resistance was utterly futile. He stopped fighting the agents and turned his tear-streaked face toward the shattered woman sitting on the floor. "Mom, please," Tyler sobbed, his voice cracking hysterically. "Do not let them take me away. I cannot go to federal prison. Call your lawyers, call the governor. Do something to stop this right now. Please, Mom." He was weeping openly now, massive tears spilling down his cheeks and staining his silk collar. The golden boy, the undisputed heir to the Wilson family empire, was begging for his mother to save him from the absolute consequences of his own spectacular arrogance. Agent Harrison gave a sharp tug on Tyler's arm, forcing him to walk toward the heavy oak doors. Tyler dragged his feet, his expensive leather shoes scraping against the floorboards, desperately looking backward over his shoulder. "Mom, help me!" he cried out one final time, his voice breaking into a breathless shriek as the agents pulled him through the doorway and out into the public corridor. The heavy oak doors swung shut with a resounding final thud, decisively sealing his fate and permanently silencing his pathetic, desperate cries for immediate salvation. Diana watched her golden child disappear into federal custody, her entire body trembling uncontrollably. She stared at the closed wooden doors for a long, agonizing moment before her head snapped around to face me. The sheer horror in her eyes vanished instantly, replaced by a frantic, deeply ingrained instinct to manipulate. She scrambled across the coffee-stained rug, disregarding the ruined fabric of her designer dress, and threw herself violently at my feet. Her hands desperately grabbed the fabric of my tailored ivory skirt, her knuckles white with manic tension. "Audrey, please," Diana gasped, her voice raw and jagged. "You have to stop this. You have to save him. You are a billionaire. You have the money to make all of this go away right now. You can pay off the syndicates. You can pay off the federal regulators. Just write a check and save your brother." I looked down at the woman clutching my clothes. She was actively pivoting straight back to her classic gaslighting tactics, attempting to twist my overwhelming financial success into an immediate familial obligation. She completely ignored the fact that she had just tried to send me to a federal penitentiary merely 24 hours ago. "We are your family, Audrey," Diana cried, tears streaming down her face as she looked up at me with wide, pleading eyes. "We are your own flesh and blood. You cannot just stand there and watch your brother go to a maximum security prison. You cannot let the bank take my home. I raised you. I gave you life. You owe us your absolute loyalty. You have more money than you could ever spend in 10 lifetimes. $10 million is absolutely nothing to you now. It is just pocket change. You can clear my debt today, and we can go back to being a happy family. She squeezed my skirt tighter, violently shaking it to emphasize her frantic demands. Tyler made a mistake, she sobbed, continuing her relentless campaign of toxic excuses. He was just under so much intense pressure to succeed. He just wanted to make his father proud. You know how incredibly hard that is, Audrey. You know exactly what it feels like to constantly seek that approval. Show some compassion. Be the bigger person. You won and we lost. You proved your point beautifully. Now do the right thing and protect your family from total destruction. Her words were a masterclass in emotional extortion. She seamlessly blended desperate begging with aggressive guilt trips, trying to weave a narrative where my refusal to pay her illegal mob debt made me the villain of the story. She genuinely believed that my vast wealth automatically erased her horrific betrayals. She thought the word family was a magical key that could unlock my bank accounts and shield her from the brutal consequences of her own devastating greed. She stared up at me, waiting for my resolve to finally break. She genuinely expected the lifetime of psychological conditioning to kick in, forcing me to surrender my empire to save her from the consequences of her own devastating choices. I looked down at the woman clutching my tailored skirt. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. I calmly reached down and peeled her manicured fingers off my clothing, pushing her hands away with deliberate and absolute finality. I took a step back, putting physical distance between myself and her desperate, sobbing form. "You want me to be the bigger person, Mom?" I asked, my voice echoing coldly in the vast space of the boardroom. "You want me to show compassion to the exact same people who cornered me in a hallway last night and threatened to send me to a federal penitentiary? You watched Tyler hand me a fraudulent extortion document. You looked me dead in the eye and then turned your back, actively condoning a plan that would have stripped me of my freedom, my reputation, and my entire future. You were perfectly willing to let me rot in a concrete cell just to preserve Tyler's fragile ego. And now you have the absolute audacity to sit on my floor and invoke the word family." Diana scrambled to her knees, reaching out again, but my freezing glare stopped her completely in her tracks. "But it is different now," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "We did not know you had this kind of wealth. We did not know you could easily afford to fix this." "That is exactly the point," I stated, my tone sharp and uncompromising. "You only value me when I am useful to your survival. When you thought I was just a vulnerable woman running a small business, I was completely disposable. Now that you know I am a billionaire, I am suddenly your precious daughter again. My wealth does not erase your betrayal. It simply exposes the absolute depths of your transactional greed." I looked around the beautiful sunlit boardroom, gesturing to the luxury eco-resort I had built from poisoned dirt. "Do you remember what you told me when you demanded I hand over this property, Mom?" I asked softly. "You said I needed to accept my place. You said this space belonged to Tyler. Well, I have a new reality for you. Sleeping arrangements are very tight. This resort is only for those who earn it. You and Tyler tried to steal your way into my castle. Now you can sleep in the ruins you created." Diana collapsed entirely against the marble floor, burying her face in her hands as loud, agonizing sobs tore through her chest. She finally realized that her golden child was going to prison, and she was going to lose her mansion, her social status, and her complete identity. The iron boundary was permanently set. I would not save her. The heavy silence that followed Diana's breakdown was suddenly broken by the sharp, authoritative snap of a crocodile leather briefcase being firmly closed. I shifted my gaze across the mahogany table. Malik Jackson stood tall and composed, his pristine navy suit perfectly pressed. The brilliant Wall Street litigator had watched the entire confrontation unfold with intense, calculating silence. He had witnessed the revelation of Tyler's Ponzi scheme, the illegal syndicate loans, and the breathtaking cruelty of Diana's extortion attempt against me. Malik picked up his briefcase, his expression radiating absolute professional disgust as he looked down at his sobbing mother-in-law. "You and your son are absolute fools," Diana Malik stated, his deep voice slicing through her pathetic weeping. "You brought illegal syndicate money into a commercial real estate transition. You attempted to leverage my legal license to facilitate a massive federal wire fraud scheme. You completely jeopardized my firm, my reputation, and my freedom just to cover up Tyler's pathetic incompetence. Do not ever contact me or my wife again." Malik turned away from her and looked directly at me. The condescending arrogance he had displayed earlier was entirely gone. In its place was a look of profound, undeniable professional respect. He recognized that he was not looking at a fragile, depressed sister-in-law. He was looking at a financial apex predator who had flawlessly outmaneuvered a hostile takeover while trapping the attackers in a federal net. "Audrey," Malik said, taking a deliberate step toward me, "I deeply apologize for my role in this ambush. I was presented with fabricated financial declarations, and I failed to execute the appropriate due diligence. That is a professional failure I intend to rectify immediately. I recognize brilliant strategic execution when I see it, and your handling of Apex Capital and this entire counteroffensive was nothing short of a masterclass." He stopped a few feet away, holding his briefcase at his side. "Tyler's remaining personal assets, whatever is left of them, need to be aggressively seized and liquidated before the federal government freezes them completely." Malik continued, shifting instantly from a family member into a ruthless corporate weapon. "The syndicates will try to claim the Connecticut mansion, but as the owner of the overarching debt portfolio through Apex Capital, you have the premier legal right to initiate immediate foreclosure. It requires incredibly aggressive predatory litigation to secure those physical assets before the bankruptcy courts intervene." Malik extended his hand toward me. "Let me handle the asset seizures," he offered, his eyes locked onto mine with absolute conviction. "I will draft the foreclosure filings for Diana's estate by this afternoon. I will systematically dismantle Tyler's remaining corporate shells, and I will ensure every single cent is legally routed directly back to Apex Capital. I will execute the entire process pro bono. Consider it a professional courtesy to a superior strategist, and my way of ensuring I am standing on the right side of this collapse." I looked at Malik's extended hand, evaluating his offer. He was ruthless, brilliant, and completely highly motivated to distance his own name from Tyler's radioactive federal fallout. Having a Wall Street litigator dismantle my mother's estate for free was the perfect ultimate checkmate. I reached out and shook his hand firmly. "I accept your offer, Malik," I replied, sealing the alliance. "Dismantle everything they have left." Malik gave a sharp nod, closed his leather briefcase, and walked out the heavy doors, already dialing his paralegal to begin the asset seizure process. The federal agents had long since removed Tyler, his pathetic cries fading into the distant corridors. I looked down at Diana. She was still crumpled on the floor, surrounded by broken porcelain and spilled coffee. My private security team stepped into the boardroom. I gestured toward my mother, instructing the guards to escort her off the premises. Diana did not fight them. She did not scream or beg anymore. The total shock of her impending bankruptcy had rendered her completely silent. She stood up slowly, her designer dress ruined, and walked out of my resort like an absolute ghost. I was finally alone. The suffocating tension that had gripped this boardroom evaporated, replaced by the deep, resonant quiet of an empire fully secured. I walked out of the executive suite, making my way through the soaring corridors of my resort. My staff offered respectful nods as I passed. They knew the storm was over. I stepped out onto the grand master balcony, the cool mountain air washing over my face. The sun was beginning its descent over the Hudson Valley, casting brilliant streaks of gold crimson and deep violet across the endless canopy of trees. The pristine lake below mirrored the burning sky, a perfect reflection of the magnificent sanctuary I built from toxic dirt. I leaned against the sturdy glass railing, looking out over my domain. For 33 years, I believed that family was an unbreakable bond, a sacred table where I simply had to earn my seat. I spent my youth twisting myself into knots, trying to shrink my ambition, my intelligence, and my very identity just to fit into their narrow, suffocating expectations. I tolerated their blatant favoritism. I absorbed their casual cruelties. I convinced myself that if I just worked hard enough, they would eventually see my worth and welcome me. But toxic people do not reserve seats for those they can exploit. They only build chairs for their own reflection. When my father handed me this contaminated land, he thought he was giving me a graveyard for my ambition. When my mother and brother conspired to steal it, they viewed my success as their inherent property. They expected me to weep to fold and to beg for their mercy. They forgot that you cannot threaten a woman who has already survived the fire. I did not beg for a seat at their table. I took the poisoned dirt they discarded, and I built my own castle. I poured my own capital, my own sweat, and my own absolute determination into the soil until it bloomed into a $50 million masterpiece. I became an apex predator in a financial jungle they could barely comprehend. When they finally came to claim what was mine, armed with gaslighting and threats of federal prison, I did not negotiate. I simply bought the very ground they stood on and evicted them from my reality. Let this be the ultimate lesson for anyone trapped in the shadow of a golden child or suffocated by the demands of a narcissistic family. You do not owe your life to people who only love you when you are convenient. Blood is nothing more than a biological accident. True loyalty is earned through respect, support, and unwavering integrity. If they hand you ruins, do not sit in the dirt and mourn. Use the broken stones to build a fortress. Amass your own wealth, cultivate your own brilliant mind, and construct a reality so undeniably powerful that their petty manipulations shatter against your walls. Stand tall in your own power, knowing that the best revenge is absolute, untouchable success. As the final rays of the sun dip below the horizon, plunging the valley into a peaceful twilight, I turn away from the balcony and walk back inside my beautifully illuminated empire, entirely ready to enjoy the magnificent dinner I personally paid for, resting comfortably in the exclusive resort I completely own, breathing in the sweet air of absolute and total peace, knowing that I am finally untouchable and free. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever found yourself trapped in a toxic family dynamic where your hard work was constantly diminished or actively exploited? Have you ever had to draw a permanent line in the sand and walk away from the people who shared your blood but absolutely refused to share their respect? I know exactly how incredibly isolating and terrifying that defining moment can feel, but I also know the profound, untouchable freedom that waits on the other side of that extremely difficult choice. Take a moment to drop your story in the comments below. This channel is a safe community for survivors, for cycle breakers, and for anyone who has ever had to build their own table when the world refused them a seat. Sharing your personal journey might be the exact inspiration someone else needs to finally recognize their own immense worth and take their absolute power back. If my story resonated with you today, if you felt that incredibly satisfying rush of justice, when the truth finally caught up to the people who arrogantly thought they were untouchable, please hit that like button right now. It helps this video reach other people who might deeply need a reminder of their own inherent strength. Make sure you click subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an episode. We have so many more incredible stories of human resilience, ultimate financial vindication, and powerful personal comebacks coming your way very soon. You are never truly alone in your daily fight for absolute respect. Keep building your massive empire. Keep fiercely protecting your mental peace. Always know your endless worth. Never let anyone dim your brilliant light for their comfort, and I will most definitely see you in the very next video. The story of Audrey and her family's breathtaking betrayal serves as a powerful testament to the necessity of building one's own foundation rather than waiting for a seat at a toxic table. For years, Audrey sought validation from a mother and brother who only viewed her as a disposable asset. They expected her to shrink herself to hand over the fruits of her agonizing labor and to accept a narrative where she was fragile and incompetent. However, the most profound lesson hidden within her triumph is that true security is never granted by those who seek to control you. It must be forged through your own unwavering independence. Audrey did not succumb to the emotional extortion her family orchestrated. When faced with the threat of federal prison and public humiliation, she did not plead for mercy or attempt to reason with their bottomless greed. Instead, she leaned on the empire she had quietly and meticulously constructed. Her journey illustrates that when we stop seeking the approval of those who consistently undermine us, we free up our energy to build an impenetrable fortress of our own. The toxic family dynamics that once held her captive ultimately became the very catalyst for her liberation. We often feel obligated to maintain relationships out of a misplaced sense of loyalty, even when those connections are actively destroying us. This narrative teaches us that blood does not automatically entitle anyone to our respect, our success, or our peace of mind. By severing the final thread of familial obligation, Audrey was able to reclaim her narrative and secure her ultimate freedom. We must all learn to recognize our own inherent worth and fiercely protect the empires we build from the ground up. Please take absolute control of your own life and enforce your boundaries starting today.